Hello again, and welcome to another episode of Leading from Alignment with our good friend, John Opalewski, and once again, our guest. John, why don't you greet everybody and introduce our guest?
It's good to be with you today, Jim, and to have our good friend, Josh Spurlock, back with us. Josh was with us last week, and we've just been talking about what's going on in the lives of leaders across the country. And Josh has a wonderful ministry that he's going to share a little bit about to leaders. And I'm not sure that it's confined just to leaders, but there's a real emphasis on leaders in ministry called My Counselor. Josh, give me the name of it again.
My Counselor Online.
That's right. My Counselor Online. And so, Josh, we were so excited about what you shared in the previous podcast. So good. And could you just recap a few minutes of that for us? What we have kind of talked about up to this point, and we're going to jump right back onto where we left off.
Absolutely. It was just so much fun. I get so energized kind of talking about these things. There's such a need within the body, right? And there's such every leader's got a big bullseye on their back where the enemy is out looking to stumble and undermine and steal the joy and effectiveness. So when we can, I can be a part of things like what you're doing here with this podcast that really support and empower folks in the work that they're doing. It just is a real joy for me to be a part of. So thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
And I think as we were talking about the building blocks of self-care.
Yeah, that's where we left off.
Yeah, for leaders and pastors around, what are the basics of that? And we started out talking about the body basics, right? Just the reality of acknowledging, accepting, living within the restraints that God designed when he created us an embodied soul. That we have a physical body that has physical requirements by God's design. We can not like it. We can wish it were different. We can take up our beef with him face to face someday and say, why did you give us a body? But the reality is that God gave us a body. We have to accept that, which means recognizing that our body needs, 7 to 9 hours of sleep a night in order to function well by design. We can't break that without breaking ourselves. Our body needs certain nutrition, needs exercise. And we also need community, that the ventral vagal system within our brain, the right brain to right brain connection that we experience with other human beings. We could really deep dive into the neuroscience of it if you wanted. But the neuroscientists confirm what the scriptures say, that we're designed to bear one another's burdens. And we're designed to rejoice with those who are rejoicing, and that it's not good for man to be alone. And that we need that community and that engagement in our life in order to be healthy. And we need it in a context that we can really be vulnerable, where we can connect with folks and share the good, bad, and ugly and feel a safety in the relationship to be able to do so. And we use the phrase of, having people in your life that you're neither accountable for nor accountable to, neither responsible for or responsible to, but that you can just be yourself and your weaknesses and your struggles and your vulnerabilities and be loved, be accepted, and be held in that space. And that is, really a starting place for how it is that we maintain health in a sustainable way.
So body, community, friendships, accountable, non-accountable, anything else? I mean, we talk a lot about rhythms, patterns, habits, anything else that comes to mind where you say, this is how you can make yourself as bulletproof as a man can make himself, a woman can make herself.
Yes.
The bad stuff,
I love it, Jim. You mentioned in the last episode that, pain is our friend. And we don't often think of it like that, right? Nobody's like, can I have some more pain, please? Yeah. But the reality of pain is not a sign of the fall, but an intentional design in our nervous system that God's given us. And it's an alert system that alerts us to an area that needs attention and needs concern. Yeah. And if you're going to bulletproof yourself as a leader, you have to pay attention to pain. That we have one of the schemes of the enemy that I see be so effective in undermining folks' joy and effectiveness in ministry is this idea that if we're really spiritual, if we really love Jesus, if we're really strong, then we just push through and ignore all kind of pain, that we just ignore the signs that our body's telling us that we're fatigued and neglecting Sabbath. We kind of push through and ignore the signs with our kids or with our spouse. They're saying there's neglect in the relationship and things that need attention. We ignore the signs of pain that we're experiencing in the close relationships around us that are problematic. And we kind of just try to block it all out, put one foot in front of the other. And, we're just going to keep going for Jesus. And that strategy doesn't work. It ignores the systems that God has wired in to alert us that there are problems. And the brave thing, the courageous thing, the strong thing, the wise thing is to get curious about those things.
Yeah.
To be like, what's this telling me? This friction I'm having with my spouse. What's this telling me? What's that pain alerting me to?
Yeah. That's, it almost sounds to me like that part of prevention is that, right? Is knowing what's actually, that there's something going on with me that isn't well or isn't whole or isn't healthy. And being in touch with that sounds to me like it's preventive. I don't know if I'm hitting the button there, but
yes.
And I think as I get older, I hope I should ask my wife if this is true. I think I get more sensitive to that as I'm getting older. I know myself better, I think, and I know when a button has been pushed, and specifically, most of the time, what button has been pushed now. Mm-hmm. Where 15, 20 years ago, Josh, I didn't understand that.
Yeah. And it undermines your joy and your effectiveness in the work that you're doing. I love that you kind of mentioned, and maybe I should ask my wife in that. And the truth is there's great wisdom in that. Every one of us has blind spots. Yeah. We don't know what we don't know. And blind spots, by definition, are those aspects that we can't see, and yet are realities in our life. And when we're not slowing down and being intentional about inviting that feedback from the community, the people, the safe people, we mentioned earlier that we need in our life, we need to be intentional, cultivating those relationships. We're not regularly slowing down and inviting the feedback that they share, then we can't be alerted to those things. And we trip over things and we don't know what we're tripping over. It's like the lights are out and we're stumbling around, stubbing our toe, banging our head on things, and we don't know what it is that's getting in our way.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's funny. If anybody that's a mechanic that's listening knows that before something breaks, there's a weird sound. There's a squeak. There's a vibration. There's, everything mechanical has symptoms. Before the engine dies, it makes noises. And I think that's what we're talking about now is, taking a moment in your day to say, how am I doing? How am I really doing? Not just how am I doing? How am I really doing? How is my marriage? How is my heart with God? How are my friendships? How's my rest and exercise? And maybe that, to incorporate that in our daily prayer, kind of that habit stacking idea, like as I'm praying, as I'm going through, the things that I do on a regular basis, taking that extra few minutes to do an assessment on my own vehicle, if you will, check the pressure in the tires, check the oil.
Yes. And having the humility and the courage to look in the mirror and to hold and ask those honest questions, and understanding that it's okay to not be okay.
Right.
Yeah. Because we get in this place, again, schemes of the enemy, where if I'm not okay as the leader, then I'm, a failure as a leader, a failure as a Christian. God's disappointed with me if I'm not okay, because I should be full of joy and okay all the time because I have Jesus in my life. And so anything less than stellar is a failure on my part.
Yeah.
We've gotta deal with that.
We've talked a lot this episode about the leader being transparent enough to give permission to the room to have issues as well. And it kind of brings a question. You talked about courage and humility. I almost as a synonym to this, that without courage, without humility. But as a leader, obviously we don't want to talk about everything, and we don't want to use this as a manipulative tool to get everybody to open up. But we know we've all been in the small group where one guy finally goes, well, this is what's really going on in my life. And the next 10 minutes, every guy's opened up about the same issues or issues like it, right? How does a leader create permission without feeling like every time I talk, I sound like a letter to Dear Abby? You know what I mean? Like I should have some answers, not just questions.
Sure.
But what's the balance? So you got any thoughts for leaders that are listening right now about that?
Yes. Oh my gosh. And I love two things that you identified there. One, kind of the Dear Abby piece, right? There's a reason why those columns, were wildly successful and ran forever and engaged so many different folks, because of how it gave permission that others face and have the same questions and struggles that I do. And so there's something powerful within that.
Everybody under 30 is Googling Dear Abby right now, just so you know.
That's right.
It's worth the Google. Just search it.
Yeah. And in the kind of myth that's there that, I'm supposed to have all the answers. I'm not allowed to have questions. I'm not allowed to raise questions that I don't know the answer to. But instead, being able to have space and to be able to, be okay with unanswered questions, being okay to be with the struggle and tension. Now, I think increasingly in our day and age, and in the millennial generation and Gen Zs that are coming up, there's a real skepticism around people who have all the answers. Then there's a real kind of, I don't trust you if you're going to try to sell me the line that you've got all the answers, because I know better than that. Really? And I don't believe that piece. And so part of being trustable and trustworthiness is being real about our holes and our shortcomings and the things that we don't know and the questions that we have. And so being able to be in that space, and a lot of it in terms of guardrails around that piece, because I think that was inherent in your question a little bit, Jim, if I heard you right. It's like, how do we practice that? How do we navigate that in a healthy and safe way? Is to think about, self-disclosure is kind of the technical language that we use around that from a counselor standpoint. We're training folks about the healthy and helpful use of self-disclosure. One of the things that we're considering is our audience, and the benefit of, in sharing this piece of information, in sharing this, how will it benefit the person I'm sitting with? How do I do so in service of those that are there? And recognizing that you don't have to have a lot of words in order to be vulnerable and go deep. You can share in a sentence or two in a part of your struggle that's relevant to and in service of your audience, and then have silence, have space, allow that to open up and invite others to engage. So those are a couple of those kind of thoughts in terms of practically, how do you engage that?
Yeah. That's really good. I think that it is where I see kind of a danger line there, Josh, is when it is, you're seeing that as a leader as a cathartic experience for you, in a sense, like, where I am just unloading it all. And it's not, I don't necessarily have the best interest of my hearers in mind there. I'm frustrated, or I'm hurting, and I'm venting, right? And
it's not in service of them, it's in service of me.
100%.
I'm getting it off my chest, or I'm kind of putting it out there. It's in service of me as opposed to in service of them. And another important safeguard around that, or a very helpful safeguard, is to share pieces that you've done your own work around. And when I'm sharing kind of vulnerabilities and pieces, whether it's in session or I'm speaking or here with you guys, I have the people in my life that I'm talking about that with first. I've got a therapist I process stuff with. I've got people who are close to me that I'm vulnerable and I'm share and process these things. And so when I share it with you, it's not the first time that I'm ever processing it here in a public setting,
Right.
for all the world to kind of
really
ever.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is because I've been on the, I my story, Josh. I went through severe depression, suicidal depression as a 34-year-old. And there were years of working my way through that before I ever talked in a public setting about it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I want to just affirm what you just said, is that was important for me, right? To work my way through a lot of some of this and I think maybe even get healthier.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if we're ever going to be, I do know we're never going to be totally healthy, right? But I had to make some progress, I think, before I could open up in a way that would be useful to the individual.
Not inviting them into your confusion.
Right. That's right.
Or your anger.
It's not,
the pastor that gets up on Sunday and talks about some people that blah, 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 blah. Well, he's talking to the guys.
Or kind of brings their fight with their spouse into the pulpit, for that.
Yeah. Some women always
that never happens, right?
Yeah. Oh, man.
So Josh,
it never happens twice when it comes to marriage.
Yes.
It might happen once. It never happens twice.
That's very true. Josh, when you were with us about a year ago, you made a statement that Jim and I have never forgotten. And we were running out of time.
I need to apologize. I'm not sure.
No.
We worked through it.
It was
We're
one
ready
of
to
those,
talk about it now.
It's one of those that we've come back to over and over again. We've mentioned it on other podcasts. You said, Jim asked you a question about, well, what about, we don't want to disappoint people. How do we, talking about a pastor's humanity. And you said, well, yeah, Jesus never did that, did he? And it was sarcastic.
Yeah.
But it was amazing. And we ran out of time talking about this whole idea of getting more comfortable with disappointing people's expectations of us. Can you unpack that more with us? Because I felt like that was one of the most important things I think I've ever heard on one of our pods.
Yes.
And we didn't have enough time to really unpack it. Could you unpack that a little bit more for us today? How do we get more comfortable with that?
Absolutely. I think Jesus is a great example to follow. One, because he disappointed lots of people all the time, people that were closest to him, his family, his mother, his brothers, his siblings, his disciples, the society at large. I mean, he was, possibly the biggest disappointment of his age, masses of people coming and laying down palm branches, waiting for the army to show up and Rome to be thrown off their shoulders. And they're like, what the heck? He's dead now? He died on a cross and there's no revolution. Jesus could be the biggest disappointer of his generation, and yet he's, obviously savior of the world and transformative. And so, as we kind of look at it and go, okay, if we're going to engage meaningful ministry, being a disappointment to many is going to be a part of it. It's going to be people that don't get it are part of it. So the question is, how do we get more comfortable with that? How do we as leaders kind of come to terms with that? Because it's one thing to say, disappointment is part of being a ministry, be like Jesus, deal with disappointment. But that doesn't take the sting away from them.
Right.
Take the knot in your gut kind of around it, or the tension in your chest.
Right. It's like saying kidney stones are part of having kidneys. That's not helpful.
It's not helpful. You're not helping me here.
Yeah.
Exactly. But I think there's some things that we can take from Jesus's example also and bring it into, our lives and context. As much as it was, fell on deaf ears or was difficult, you see Jesus modeling, leaning into a community with a tight-knit group of people, right? Mm-hmm. that he tried to share the struggles, the hardness. He tried to share the ways that he was going to disappoint them and that they're going to let down. It wasn't for lack of effort on his part of putting out there the realities of what he had to offer and what he didn't have to offer them. And, again, those closest to him a lot of times couldn't hear it or wouldn't hear it, and that was part of the grief and the pain and the anguish of being alone with those things that Jesus felt. And for us, we have need of the same thing, to be able to process with those that are close to us and those that we have safety with, the truths of our authentic self and the truths of the things that the Lord is leading us in and how we engage, that we know we're going to generate disappointment with the people in our life. That the starting place is to stop pretending like that doesn't bother us.
That's good.
To stop pretending like that just rolls off our back and we're not impacted by that. Jesus was impacted by it in a really visceral, physical way. We're impacted by it. Us owning it, naming it, and saying, this is really hard. I know that this is what I need to do or where we need to go or what needs to happen. But I also know that there's going to be a lot that are upset about that. And that really bothers me. I'm sad about that. I need to grieve that, or I need to understand what earlier wound in my life that touches in that's kind of causing that to feel the intensity, not only of the present day, here and now event, but tapping into the wounding that it brings forward and supercharges it in the present.
Josh, I think what you just said is so profound, because here's what we're not trying to get leaders comfortable with. We're not trying to get them to not care.
Right.
Like, I don't care what anybody thinks. I don't care.
I'm made of stone. Right. It's not going to bother me. All I need is Jesus. It doesn't matter if anybody else.
Right. And so we're not pitching that idea all here, right? I think what you're saying is getting in tune with, wow, that disappointing people hurts.
And it's scary.
Yeah.
It's really affecting me. And to get curious and compassionate about that.
Yeah.
What's that about? What does that pain tell me about my story? What does that pain invite me to give care and attention to?
Right.
And why does
this hurt so bad? Maybe my motives going into this weren't the best. And I'm only discovering my own motives by not getting the applause I thought I would get, but the rejection of the crowd. Right.
So many different possibilities and things, right?
I think if anybody had a reason to be nuts in the Bible, it's probably King David. And I watched the Psalms where he's like, this is bad and my enemies are prospering and God, you're a million miles from me. But that Psalm always seems to end with, but I've made a decision to trust you. So it isn't like there is no pain and I'm bulletproof. The man's got so much blood on his hands, God won't let him build his temple. So he's a warrior. He knows blood and guts and pain. He's a man's man. He kills giants for fun and bears and lions and things of that nature. So we know that he's a man's man, but I love where he just says, I'm really hurting. This really is awful. I don't feel what I want to feel. God, you're a million miles from me, but I've made it.
And he's angry, right? I love that you mentioned the anger piece, right? Because we struggle with that so much. Here's a man after God's own heart, and he's like, dash their children against the rocks. Well, the dogs lick their blood up out of the streets. Like, wow. Good night.
Oh, glad he's not my father-in-law at that point. Yeah.
And God chose to preserve that in the scriptures.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right. Just the reality of our struggle and the hardness and the pain and all of the messiness that being human and dealing with the broken world generates.
Right. Well, I got one last question for you. Two last questions. The first one is things are starting to open up and things are starting to be restored and momentum's starting to build. And we've used the analogy of a wave and a surfer. That, if you catch the right thing right now, you can get on top of something as long as you stay balanced, and the wave will do most of the work that gets you moving. So people are starting to dream again. But we all know the pendulum swings, right? There was nothing, everything was closed, and now everything's open, and I'm overwhelmed. And I talked a little bit about the emotional health side of leaders now that are starting to plan calendars that they actually think might happen They're not just, maybe once COVID's over with, but we might actually have an Easter service this year, and
Woo!
Vacation Bible School, and people that have been doing not much but watching Netflix for 2 years are being asked to serve. So talk to the leaders about how to find the right swing so that pendulum doesn't go out of balance, but we're back to building the kingdom again.
Yes. Yeah. So you hit on something that's super important here. And as, I'd say easy, it's simple to do, not necessarily easy to do, but, we're in that space of planning out the calendar and planning out the events and all the things. We need a calendar for our self-care and Sabbath also. We need to be as intentional about how we're going to cultivate and care for the realities of our family needs and self-care needs as we are in planning out the ministries schedule there. We need to determine, how many days a year are we going to work, right? Which maybe sounds crazy, but you got 365 days in a year. If you're taking, 2 days off from the office a day, that's 104 days that you're deciding that I'm not going to engage work. And do I have some accountability around that in the same way I have accountability for my ministry outcomes? Right? Is there a group of people in my life holding me accountable to caring for my family and caring for myself based on some parameters that I've defined in advance and said, here's what I'm going to do and I'm not going to do in order to maintain health within this body God has entrusted to me, this family God has entrusted to me, and who are the people that are going to come alongside and say, hey, okay, so things shifted and you're working this day instead of being off. So where are you going to make that up? Because your family's important and your health's important. Like, you have got to build that same sort of structure and accountability into those things as you do into the ministry objectives. And the one support the other.
Do you want to hear something crazy?
Yes.
I've been in full-time ministry for 35 years. No one has ever challenged me to take a day off, to take a Sabbath, totally. But no one has ever said, as you plan your year, which 104 days will you be taking off? It's always an afterthought of trying to cram in that vacation, or that I'm willing to make as the number one priority, 52 Sabbaths, and then some other days, because I got to do yard work and, mow the dog and wash the car and, all that kind of stuff, But when you said that, I just kind of I started laughing. Like, it's never occurred to me to block out 104 days and then plan the birthday and the anniversary. And that's
to say, we're going to do 104 days as a baseline. And then we're going to do as a family some trips. We're going to take, another 14 to 28, that we're going to go and do things wwhere we actually get away and unplug for a few days in place. Like, if you do that, you're looking at, 48 to 152 or so days out of your 365 days, and be intentional about blocking them out and consider them sacred. Plan around it.
Wow.
Put that into your planning schedule.
Josh, I've just heard, I've heard jaws drop all over the country.
Yeah.
With this. I mean, I harp on this so much with my team. One of our core values is healthy work rest rhythm. And we can call each other out with that. And we're really good about doing that with each other. There's accountability there. But I wonder at times, have we not thought about rest deeply enough?
Yes.
This is what I'm hearing is you're sharing this. I'm challenged. This is like a hobby horse for me, but I feel challenged by that. And I wonder, why do we have this so mixed up? And I don't think we have enough time to unpack all of that. Because we're up against time. But that just really grabbed me. And I thought, I'm with Jim. I've never thought about it at that level before. I mean, what would you say to somebody who is, I mean, we work with pastors, some pastors, now most of our pastors, that, they're getting better at
Yeah.
stopping at the right time or a good time during the day and taking a Sabbath, because we really,
because of pain. Yeah. Because of
we
pain.
really push on that.
Yeah.
But let's say there's somebody listening who says, are you kidding me, Josh? That seems so impossible.
Right.
Where can they start? Can you give them maybe a couple of next steps? And maybe they can't start with 104. Would it be okay if they started with a smaller number and worked their way toward that? Or I'm asking for a friend.
Asking for a friend. Asking for a friend. Absolutely. The point is to be intentional.
Yeah.
And to bring the same kind of intentionality that we bring to our planning and ministry and the work that we do and we've called to this aspect of life as well, because it's very important. And the consequences of neglect undermine the whole of our family and our ministry if we don't give it the attention that it needs and deserves. And so to bring in intentionality and to bring accountability into this domain of life.
Yeah.
Wow. Man. Back to the drawing board. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not discouraged at all by what you said. I'm challenged by it. And it's going to have me, Josh, this is going to have me thinking for quite a while. Jim, do you want to, Josh, let me just say this before Jim wraps this up. I want to just thank you again for being on our podcast and what God has deposited in you and letting that come out, not just to Jim and I, but to all of the folks who listen and watch. I just feel this is so rich. It is so helpful. It is so profound. And we're grateful that you carve out space for us a couple times a year to just help us think better about health and longevity and actually fruitfulness that comes from what you're encouraging us to do and think about. So thank you. I just wanted to say thanks. That's a long thank you, but I really appreciate you, brother.
I really appreciate that. It warms my heart, and truly it's an honor. I love, I can't see the faces of the folks who are listening, but I hold them in my heart, and I kind of know that they're out there, and have the opportunity to speak a word of encouragement and challenge and participate with you as a co-laborer in the ministry that our King's called you to. Feels like a real honor to me. So thank you so much for having me.
Right on. Hey, Jess, I know one of the questions that I wanted to ask before we were done here. How do we get a hold of you? And then maybe if you can talk a little bit about the money, the cost to be engaged with somebody in your organization, and just share on that for a minute or so, would you?
Yeah, that's a great question. So folks can connect with me and then connect with our team at mycounselor.online. So that's the name as well as the web address. So you can plug it into your web browser. It's mycounselor.online. That will get you out to us. And in terms of the costs, budget wise, we've got packages that start at $220 a month that will allow for a person to kind of work into their household budget, or if you've got continuing education budget, or an HSA or a flex account where you set money aside, where you can budget in $220 a month and meet regularly with a counselor that can be there in crises, but also in a preventative way, and being able to help you, figure out where to start with some of these changes that maybe you're feeling challenged in.
Right. One of the pushbacks I get when I send somebody to a counselor is they say the expense element. And then I encourage them to look at the cost of a divorce lawyer or a long-term psychiatric care and medication. And really, when it comes to preventative, this is an inexpensive insurance policy for fruitfulness, right? This is something, and we really, John and I know Converge, the whole team, we strongly encourage you to take really, really good care of yourselves. And sometimes that means bringing in people that can see your blind spots, that can be honest with you. Someone you can be honest with, knowing that they don't know anybody you know. They're not going to run into somebody at the grocery store and talk about what you talked about. It's out of town. It's someone you'll never probably meet in person, and there's a safety to it. And it's good. So thank you, both of you, gentlemen, for sharing your hearts, sharing your lives. Convergecoach.com, mycounselor.online, man. Get some help and move forward and be healthy. That's what this season is about. So God bless you. Our dear listeners, live long and prosper. And we will see you again as you continue to lead from alignment.